Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome today to another video without my little lapel mic because apparently that lapel mic is horrible and I ordered a new one but it's not here yet, so I'm using my over-the-camera microphone and hopefully you can hear me because I am in fact again outside with the chickens. There were some dogs freaking out like 5 minutes ago, but they seem to have calmed down. An airplane was going overhead. But hopefully we're good because up north here in good old northern Idaho, we are on the track to colder weather and it's just so lovely out right now. I couldn't resist. I felt like I just needed to film outside. So I'm here filming outside again, and today I am going to be doing another Q&A. I wanted to make another video, but I was not totally at a loss. I do have some ideas for a couple of videos, which by the way, feel free to leave topic requests down below. But the ideas that I have on my list, I just wasn't really ready to tackle today. And so I thought, you know what? I have other questions from like previous times where I've pulled questions for Q&As where I have not answered them. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go back and answer some more of those questions. So hopefully I am not doing double answers. These questions are actually from like a few months ago. So if I've already answered them, that's kind of annoying, but maybe the answers have changed because time has gone by. So let's do it. This is a variety of questions, by the way, as usual. Okay, so this question says, how many times did you fail at making sourdough before you got it right? It took me, honestly, like a couple of years. In our house, when we started making sourdough, Dan was actually the first person to take the endeavor on, and I'm really, really grateful that it ended up going that way. Oh my gosh, is this dog back and freaking out? I'm really glad that Dan was the one to take this endeavor on because when I was sick and pregnant, he was able to really keep it going when I was having a harder time doing that. So even though I am the one that carries the sourdough load, like 90% of the work, I'd say now, maybe even more than that, he is able to pick up the slack if I need help. But it literally took me, I want to say like a year and a half or so, maybe longer, to really understand what the heck was even going on with sourdough. So I think that because I had such a hard time getting started, I think I do a really good job of explaining really simply how it works and how to do the simplest sourdough bread. So if you are someone who has been scared to dive in, first off, I highly recommend it. It is so satisfying to make your own bread. And as we all know, sourdough is the way that bread was made for forever until like the last 100 years. So I will have a link down below to, I made 2 sourdough videos like a couple of years ago before I got pregnant with Lizzie on the easiest sourdough bread ever. Literally, other people will say like the easiest sourdough bread. No, this is the easiest sourdough bread. I'll link that down below. And then also sourdough bagels, a video of me making the sourdough bagels. So I will link those down below and you should definitely check them out, and do not be discouraged if it takes you a little bit to get the hang of it because it is so worth it. Okay, someone asked, even though this is an old question, how are you doing? Like, really? And the reason I want to answer that question is because I'm doing really well. My postpartum, I've talked about this, has been overall so far a really good postpartum. It has been easier being next door to my parents, obviously. I actually talked about that a little bit in the video that I just uploaded called It Takes a Village. I think I talked about it. Just in general, I've just been feeling good. I've actually been feeling a lot, I've mentioned this a little bit too, I've been feeling a lot less bothered by like haters on the internet, because you guys know it's been like a 3-year onslaught of like just people that really don't like me being really loud. And all of you that are so kind and supportive have also gone out of your way to be loud and encourage me. And I do want to say that that means more than you know. Like when I literally tell this to Dan all the time, I'm like, I don't understand how 3 years later I am still finding old messages of support after our initial like cancellation and everything with Bowser went down, and then everything, all of the like lies that were told about us in our adoption journey, which by the way, I think because I've been being so bold lately about so many topics, it's really like fanning the flames of like the haters, because people have been crawling out of the woodworks on all of my platforms and not only yelling at me about Bowser, but also yelling at me about our adoption journey and totally getting like the facts completely wrong. Like it's like a really bad game of telephone. Someone, I may address this, like I said, in a video, like very specifically, because it's so outrageous. Someone literally, multiple people have been saying to us, like, you returned a child because you couldn't put them on the internet. I'm like, what are you talking about? We were in the very early phases of entering a program. We had not been paired up with anyone. We weren't even in the program. So like a really bad game of telephone. But that bothered me a lot more than it does now. And I've been really grateful to God lately because I feel like he lifted a big weight off of my shoulders, where now it's just kind of almost funny. Funny is maybe a little bit light of a word, but because these people don't know me, and because I've realized that, like, wow, people just have really different worldviews and moral compasses, and that's okay. It just kind of is what it is. But you know, like I said, I also want to acknowledge the fact that, like, those of you that have gone out of your way to be supportive and kind, it means a lot, because you saw that people that don't agree with us are definitely the loudest people in the crowd. They're very enraged, and they feel like they have to, like, tell everyone their rage and tell you when they unfollow or tell you when they're disappointed, and it's just kind of wild. But the support means a lot. I feel like I'm repeating myself now. So yeah, but this has really shifted, I'd say, in the last like couple of months. And some of you have actually messaged me that, saying that you can like see that something has shifted. And I feel that, and I'm very, like I said, grateful to the Lord for that, because I had been praying for that for a while, for direction, for peace, you know, if we are supposed to stay online, just for peace and strength. And so I'm very grateful. Okay, next comment, random. Someone said, favorite way to drink your coffee. Fun fact, I don't drink coffee. If you're an OG around here, you already know that. But to those of you that aren't, I just figured I'd answer that. I don't drink coffee. Okay, so this question, I actually think I answered it when I pulled these questions last time, but it was in regards to my birth with Logan. Now I have obviously had Lizzie, and so I think that the question is still interesting. And she said, knowing what you know now, would you have done anything different with your home birth? And my answer is basically no. I think maybe what I would have done differently, although it's not the birth, it's part of my prenatal care, is I would have started getting IVs sooner. I think that because I waited so long to start my IVs, the dehydration that I dealt with was just exasperated. And I spent so much time sitting in the sun, which I think was great. I knew, or at least I felt like I was going to be very nauseous in my pregnancy, because I had been pregnant twice before and was very nauseous. So I felt like, okay, I'm gonna be nauseous, but if I'm gonna be throwing up and I'm gonna be nauseous, I want to do it in the sunshine. And because of the time of year when I got pregnant, I was able to do that for like the first couple of months. And so that was amazing. But I think that that was also part of dehydrating me. And so if I could go back, I would have started my IVs maybe like a month sooner, honestly, maybe like 6 weeks sooner, because I feel like once I started getting IVs, that was when I really turned a corner. Like every time I would get an IV, it was easier for me to eat food when she left, and I could keep food down easier. So yeah, in regards to my birth, I don't think so. I mean, you guys know there's a part of me that in fantasy la la land, I would like to entirely free birth. But honestly, I can't even say I would change that, because the part of me that didn't want a free birth is still the part of me that doesn't want a free birth. And that's the part of me that knows that based on my last 3 births, because I do count my miscarriage, because if you've had a miscarriage like naturally and vaginally, you know that it is literally like mini birth. And all 3 times I went into complete shock. If you guys have seen my 2 birth videos, I go into shock. And even though it was a different kind of shock because it was grief, I went into shock as well when I miscarried. And so because of that, you know, when you see all these videos like on Instagram of these moms peacefully delivering their babies, and they pull their babies out, they're like, oh, and they're so calm, and they're just like, oh, my baby's fine. Like the husband's like, is baby good? They're like, baby's good. That's not me. I am in such shock that I actually don't trust myself to know if baby is okay. And if baby wasn't okay, I don't know the procedures or the things that I would do to make sure baby was okay. And even if I did know the procedures, I don't know that I trust myself to know, because it seems like, you know, 3 times now, I'm in shock every single time afterwards, like literal physical shock. You guys, I mean, like I said, if you saw my birth video, you know, I am a totally different person. I am in literal shock. And so honestly, that was a long-winded way to say, no, I feel like my last birth with Lizzie was basically my dream birth. Like my labor length, the way everything unfolded, you know, if I could be really picky, like even pickier, which is how I went into my birth with Lizzie, because I feel like my birth with Logan for a lot of women would be considered a dream birth. You know, 10 hours isn't really that long in the scheme of things. And I was at home and I didn't tear and I had a natural delivery, like all of that, check is great. But you guys know, if you've watched me talk about this before, I was left feeling very, like traumatized in a different way, just because it was the scariest experience of my life, like going into labor with Logan. And so I thought, okay, I know it was like a perfect birth in those check things, but in terms of like really honing in on the details, I don't want to be as scared this time. Like that's what I was thinking going into Lizzie's birth, and I don't want to do it alone, and I would like labor to be shorter. And I got all of those things. I went into labor when Dan was awake, so Dan got to labor with me, and it made such a difference having him labor with me. You guys know, probably, if you've seen me talk about this, I thought the first time around, what could Dan do for me? Like, I'm the one that has to give birth, like, suck it up. Turns out he could do a lot. You know, it was amazing emotionally and physically to have Dan's emotional support, his spiritual support, and his physical support squeezing on my hips. The labor was shorter, and just because I had done it before and because I was not alone this time, I was just not as afraid. And so I really got everything I wanted. Now, if I could turn the volume up on those things even more, if we do end up having another baby, hi chicken, which I think I've answered this before, we don't know. I mean, I guess technically as long as you're in your fertile window, you never know. But in terms of like us, you know, trying or not trying, we don't know if we're going to have more kids. I've said before that there's part of me that if it's like, quick, give an answer. Do you think you're done? Do you want another one? I'd be like, I do. But then like, there's all the afterthoughts of my health and how hard that pregnancy was. You know, that was, geez. The 9 months with Lizzie was just like the hardest, scariest. Holy Toledo. Can you guys see this on camera? There are so many bugs flying all around me. This is like, I'm in like a swarm of bugs. Please just don't go in my mouth and we're fine. Anyways, that was like just the hardest, scariest season of my life, you know, to be nauseous and sick and throwing up for that long does something to your brain chemistry. It's crazy. But obviously, now that Lizzie is here, it was so worth it. And so there is part of me that like, we're just going like, what does God have for us? You know, one of the people I mentioned that I'm going to be relaunching my podcast, I actually think I'm doing the first interview next week. I'm waiting for these mics to come. And it's like a 2 set of lapel mics, and I'm pretty sure I'm shooting my first and second interview next week, and possibly the third interview the week after. Anyways, one of those interviews is a friend who actually couldn't get pregnant like when she was younger, so she was actually infertile in her younger years and had all of her babies when she was older, and so she just had her 5th baby at home at 42, all 5 of her babies at home, and she works like in the mainstream medical establishment. She's fascinating. But she, you know, so when I look at her, I go, okay, I probably have time, like maybe I just need a little more time and I need to just wait because it's so fresh. And you know, but we'll see. What was the point of that? Oh, so if we do have another baby, I would like to turn up the volume. You know, am I pushing it here? Am I getting a little too selfish? But on all of those things. If I could have an even shorter labor, awesome. Still when Dan is awake, yes, awesome. If I could be even more calm, even less afraid, that would be awesome. But I mean, geez, if I had either of my 2 labors again, that would be fantastic because they were both great. But if I'm being really, really honest, Lizzie's labor and delivery was much better than Logan's. I even did to myself in my like delivery with Lizzie, I did one of the things that my midwife in Nashville did with me with Logan. I literally just like pulled my own vagina apart at one point to help her like come out. It was just amazing. It really is true that like once you've done it once, it is different the second time. In some ways it's scarier because you're like, oh my gosh, I know what I'm going into. And in other ways it's more calming because you're like, okay, I know what I'm going into. So that was a long spiel, but you know, this is the season that I'm in, baby season, and also pondering like, am I going to do this again? You know, at least our part again. God does his part if that's what he has for us. It's not even his part. That instantly feels like blasphemy, even though I think you know my heart, because it's really all God. But yeah, okay, this is a good like hyper relevant question. Someone said, any advice on how to approach reading the Bible for the first time? Are there beginner editions? Okay, after I said that was hyper relevant, then I just realized I read the question wrong. So I don't know about the first time, but I'm currently in a Bible study right now where we're going through Ecclesiastes, and then we are simultaneously going through a book by, I think her name is Jen Wilkin, called Women of the Word. And I'm at the beginning of it, but I can already recommend this book because the points that Jen makes are so like simplistic and obvious, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I actually mean it in like a profound way. Like as I'm reading her tips and her just her tips towards how to study the word, I'm like, wow, this is like so good. You know, like when you're going through a book, asking like who wrote it, who was it written to, when was it written, and what are the main themes. So those are some of the tips that she gives, and she's just really going through how to study, which I appreciate because a lot of you guys have asked me over the years like how I study, and I'm literally like, I don't know. I just kind of read and sit on it. And I've been in Bible study groups, and I listen to sermons, and I listen to podcasts of people like commentating on different books of the Bible. So this has been a really interesting, now I'm like super paranoid that bugs are like gonna fly in my, I'm like, I feel something, I'm like, is it a bug? And honestly, start wherever you want to start. Some Christians would say start in the Gospels, but I think that the whole Bible is all equally important. So start wherever you feel drawn. You could just start from the beginning and go through. And I don't know that I'd recommend like a beginner version. Like there are obviously different, versions, but I don't know that I love them. Like there's the Message, which is put in very like simplistic terms, but a lot of people would say that the Message is not exactly the greatest translation of things. So I don't really think there is a wrong way to start. I would just start, and I, like I said, highly recommend that book, Women of the Word, at least so far. I haven't gone through the whole thing yet. Okay, so this next question said, is there anything that you wish others knew/understood about you? That's kind of funny, especially like reaching back to the very first question when someone asked how I'm doing, and I ended up talking about the cancellation. In my moments of being down, especially over the last 3 years, what I wish other people knew and understood was my actual heart, our actual motives, our actual intentions around not only everything I do on my channel and why I put myself out there, but particularly around the things that we were canceled about, everything that unfolded with Bowser, everything that unfolded with our adoption journey. I've said this before, I never felt more misunderstood in my life. And sometimes it feels dumb to keep talking about it. Sometimes not though, because people keep coming at us. But sometimes it'll feel dumb, like I said, because people will be like, oh, she's just playing the victim. And it's like, no, like, have you ever been so severely misunderstood? Like, that's what I want to reach through the screen and say to people and be like, dude, that's what I wish people knew. But this goes back to what I feel like God is doing in my heart. It's like another level of it, like leveling up, because I think everybody knows that feeling. It doesn't matter whether you're on the internet or not. Everybody knows the feeling of being misunderstood and wishing that someone understood you. And I think everybody knows the feeling of sometimes you can't make people understand you, and there is no amount of clarification that can clarify the situation. And this is just like another level of that. I feel like God has continued to work on that in me my whole life, honestly. There have always been, I think everybody knows this in their own life, like there are patterns that will present themselves within your life. And I have had patterns throughout my life before I was on the internet and on the internet. And it kind of just seems like the internet has amplified some of those things because now I've reached more people. I've reached more people over the last 14 years, and some of those patterns that present themselves are things that that I have to learn, things that I've done. And some of them are things that it's just like, okay, this is interesting, patterns in other people that I notice, because we all have patterns. So yeah, that's really vague, but I wish that like sometimes you could open up your heart and people could see your own, your intentions behind things. But, that's just, like I said, I think that's the way of the world. People misconstrue other people's intentions all the time. I'm probably doing it to other people regularly and I don't even realize it. And so that's part of letting it go too, is realizing like I am a sinner, obviously, in and of myself. I make my own mistakes, and I definitely either purposefully or inadvertently cast judgments on other people. And maybe sometimes they're right and maybe sometimes they're wrong. And it's just kind of like, that's the way of life. Like, let it go. I guess one other thing I'd say with that, and this might be more helpful for you personally if you're trying to like gain anything from this, is that I get nervous and embarrassed too. This is one of those things, when I say patterns throughout my life, that has always been this way. Pre-internet, when I was working as a stage performer, when I was doing theater, when I was doing, commercials and indie films and all of that, is I always feel like I've been taken as someone who like doesn't get nervous, isn't ever embarrassed, is just super boisterous and outgoing. And I am boisterous and expressive, but I have always struggled with nervousness, with embarrassment, with feeling like imposter syndrome or scared to put myself out there. But what I've always recognized from a very young age, because my parents had me reading different like self-help and developmental books when I was very young, business books and blah, 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 all that, is I realized very young that everybody struggles with that. Like, unless someone basically, not to be mean, maybe you don't struggle with this and you're not like a narcissist, but kind of the general picture I got is that like, unless you're a narcissist, you're going to struggle with that to some degree or another regularly some or all of those things: imposter syndrome, nervousness, embarrassment. It's just part of being human. It's part of being a little bit self-obsessed. And yeah, I just think it's part of life. And so I've thought that before, especially for people who are maybe nervous to do things. I want them to know, like, I get nervous too. We all get nervous. And I just think that honestly, in general, my decision to choose to be okay with embarrassing myself, which is relative anyways, because some other people might be like, yeah, girl, you did embarrass yourself. And some other people might be like, oh my gosh, no, you really touched me through your work. I'm so glad that you put yourself out there, but choosing in my own mind to be like, hey, it's okay to embarrass yourself, I think has served me really well over the course of my life and brought me a lot of cool opportunities and fun experiences. Someone asked how God has been growing me in this stage of life, but I feel like that's kind of a big theme that I've already answered in this video. I feel like he's definitely been emboldening me in a lot of areas and wiping away feelings of shame that have been trying to cling on to me, particularly in the last 3 years. Someone asked my favorite food at the moment. It's still chili. I love chili. I always love Mexican food. Perma fan of tacos. But yeah. Someone asked how I deal with mom guilt. They said, how do you deal with mom guilt? I know you have it because everyone does. And yes, I definitely do struggle with mom guilt. Honestly, the way that I deal with it, I pray a lot because I know that part of it is a lie, because like you said, everyone deals with it. So I know that part of it is not true. And so that's kind of the first half, right? Part of it is a lie and just something you're going to struggle with, you're going to fight. And then the other way that I deal with it is I try to be really honest about how I'm balancing out my days. And I keep extensive lists. Sometimes my lists are too long. My mom and I were talking about that recently. She's like, are you keeping lists? I'm like, yes, mom, look. And I show her my list and she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, that list is way too overwhelming. Like, I would be anxious with a list like that. I'm like, oh. So I keep a lot of lists, but on my list, I like to also keep a list of the things that I want to and need to do for Logan and Lizzie outside of just, keeping them fed and clean and, whatever. Things like, okay, I need to make sure Lizzie gets her tummy time today. Okay, I've actually started reading to Lizzie recently. So it's reading with Lizzie. With Logan, it's like, okay, we need to get a walk. We need outside time beyond just a walk. We need to read. We need to practice our piano scales. I want him to do some painting. Like, I'll write down those things so that I can make sure to the best of my ability, that I am rounding out my days and that they're not just focused too much on one thing. I try to create balance, and balance is hard, right? The other thing is, in terms of creating balance, Dan has been a good reminder for this. I've tried to remind myself that balance does not just exist within one day. Balance also exists within the course of a week, and it also exists over the course of a month. So some days might be more dedicated to one thing than the other. And that's okay because you're looking at the scope of the week, not just the day, if that makes sense. Another good thing is to remember, like what you just said, that everybody struggles with mom guilt. My mom said that to me last week. I was having a day where I was doing some work projects and I was feeling like I had put more effort into my work that day than I had into my children. And my mom goes, you know what? Either way you split it though, you're still gonna end up feeling some guilt or feeling off. So you just keep going for balance. But if you were putting all of your time into your children, she's like, then you're gonna be missing some of your creative stuff that you work on. You're gonna feel bad about not getting your work done, the things that you said you wanted to do. She's like, but if you were doing that all the time, obviously, then you're gonna be missing your kids. She's like, everything is always gonna feel like you have to just trust the scope of time, because everything is always going to feel a little bit like, I don't know, like you're juggling a lot, because you are juggling a lot. That's just, I think, the life of being a mom, is wearing a lot of hats. Even when you try to cut back on the hats that you're wearing, I just think you're still wearing a lot of hats. Like, let's say you don't work at all and you're just a stay-at-home mom, which I don't like that word just, but you get what I mean. You're not working another job separate from the job of your household. I still think you're wearing a lot of hats. And so I think that, there's this element of striving for balance and praying, bringing it to the Lord. Like, Lord, give me wisdom, give me grace. I can't do it without your strength. Open my eyes to the areas that I need to grow and learn. And then simultaneously, giving yourself grace, like not beating yourself up so much, because you are ultimately just a person trying to raise children who are their own individual people with their own individual personalities. like when we're talking about discipline, for example, which is another discussion I've been having with my parents lately, you know, parenting books are helpful. It's helpful to get the wisdom out of, you know, podcasts and books. But at the same time, you know, I've seen this joke go around, like something specific will happen and it's like, it wasn't like this in the parenting book. It's like, yeah, every kid is also ultimately different. Everybody has a different leaning, proclivity, if that's the word, towards a different type of sin. Everybody has different strengths. And so, you know, knowing that you are a person who has strengths and who sins, and that your children are individual people that have strengths and sin as well, and learning day by day, like, okay, we're going to grow. I'm going to learn how to serve them better every day. That's one of my prayers at night when I'm praying with Logan, that we pray over just our whole family. Lord, help us learn how to serve each other and not take each other for granted tomorrow. Help me be the mom that he and Lizzie need me to be for them, and help them learn how to, well, obey, to feel your Holy Spirit, and help us serve each other. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this was a rant in 14 different directions, and I don't know if I answered anything, but that's kind of my off the top of my head thoughts around that. Ooh, am I going to touch this? This is on the topic of kids offline, child protection and privacy. Thoughts? Okay, here's my thoughts around this. I think that this whole movement of like child protection and privacy, I think in some ways it's valid, right? It's one of those things in life that, yes, kids can't consent to. They don't understand the internet. Really question, do any of us really understand the internet? It's hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes, like how many people are supposedly out there watching. So I think in some ways it's valid, you know, and people can be very cruel online. And, you know, I mean, you guys see my kids are not completely private, but I don't put them in a ton of videos. They aren't out there all of the time, you know. And I also think there is a difference too between like centering your content around children, making your money around the children, versus keeping them completely off. And here's the other thing too, just like so many things, right? Birth, dietary choices, educational choices. I think that there is specific things that are right for each person and each family. I don't feel like blanket across the board, like nobody should be showing their kids online. I just don't. And part of me as a conspiracy theorist, to be honest, part of me thinks it's a little bit weird. I've heard actually actors in Hollywood say in interviews before, hopefully one day. Now, granted, I actually have to pause myself because I do think that acting in Hollywood or anywhere for that matter and being on set is totally different than like sharing a family picture or joyful moments at home online. It's totally different. One is work, literal work. Trust me, as someone who grew up in LA, it's work. And one is having a moment captured that's shared. You know what I mean? Like it's just your life. It's different. But they basically have said in these interviews, and I've heard multiple actors say this, hopefully one day there won't have to be any child actors in movies and we can just replace them with AI actors. And the thing is, I think we live in a very anti-natalist world in a lot of ways, particularly in regards to the way that the media sees children and the worldview of a lot of the people who run the entertainment industry. It's very anti-natalist, very pro-abortion, a lot of the things that I am not. And I think that part of that, like part of removing kids from media and being online or in film or television, I think it's sad and kind of almost nefarious a little bit, honestly, because I do think that a lot of people, all right, yes, there's always the chance that like something weird could happen or someone could say something mean, but I think that that same risk exists in real life. When you take your kids out in public, you don't know who's looking, you don't know who's filming, you don't know what cameras are running. One could even argue if you send your kids off to public school or any school or even Sunday school at church, like, are you positive that your kids are safe when you're not there? Are you willing to drop them off? Like, there are a lot of risks and things that parents take every day, and a lot of things that kids partake in that they do not consent to or they cannot understand what they're consenting to. But I think that there is a lot, if not the majority, of times where images of kids are shared online that are genuinely just wholesome and encouraging and nice things of kids that encourage other people to want to start their own family, honestly. And that's part of it, is I think that like seeing kids can encourage, not kids seeing kids, but seeing kids can encourage people to want to start their own family. That was kind of part of it for me, like not all of it obviously, but I remember I was looking at photos of a kid online one day, a friend's kids, and I was looking, and like something just in that moment, I was like, dude, I've been thinking about this for years. I am ready. I want my own child. And we embarked on our journey. So I don't know. I don't even know if I'm going to keep this in because I know that this is highly debated, and I get it. I get why it's highly debated. But Dan and I have talked about this in circles for years now, and we're both on the same page with that. It's like you can walk a line of like not quote unquote exploiting your children and share them with friends or family. And honestly, bottom line is, beyond that, the people that I know that don't, I think that's fine. I think just like I said, a bunch of other things, each family is different. Each family, like people have different jobs, people have different lifestyles, people create different content, people live in different areas, and you have to choose individually what is right for you. That's something, by the way, that I felt like in my last video, It Takes a Village. I mean, I feel like this in all my videos, honestly. But I feel like people take what I say as someone on the internet like way too personally. Like, you're saying that everybody has to be in this situation. And what about people that X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, I'm not saying that everybody. I'm speaking out for the people like me who maybe felt isolated in their thoughts or hadn't thought about something in a certain way to be able to think about it in a certain way. But I am fully aware, as you, the viewer, should be fully aware, that everybody has a different life, different situations, different family members, different income streams, different resources, blah, blah, the list goes on, different traumas for them to consider when they're making their own life choices across the board. So yeah. Oh, I think I've already answered this question before, but I love her. If your life were a movie, what actress would you want to play you? Which I want to know your guys' answer too. That's really random, but I want to know your answer. My answer would be Rachel McAdams. I love her. I do. I love her. Someone asked what my little brother is up to. Hopefully, I think he's fine with me answering this. He is living his best Idaho life, playing lots of pickleball, lots of volleyball, and he's actually an intern at our church now, which I can say our church because Dan and I actually recently switched churches again. And I don't like to report that because I really don't like church hopping. But we had a couple of reasons where after I was at the point, like I'd had Lizzie, which we didn't go to church at all when I was sick with Lizzie. Afterwards, we had some things happen where some friends were leaving the church. There was nothing that serious. And we were just like, you know what? We don't feel like this is necessarily our home right now or anymore for the time being. And so we ended up exploring other churches again. And my parents go to a mega church out here in Idaho, and we really like their church, but we did not want to go to that church because it is so big. But they have other campuses, and we ended up visiting their campus that is more local to our town. My parents actually drive to the other big campus, and we really liked it, and more particularly, Dan really liked it. I really liked it too, but I think if it were up to me to pick a church, I don't know that I would ever settle on a church. I feel so indecisive and torn about so many areas in my faith, what worship even means, the way that a church service should be structured, and honestly the list goes on and on and on. But Dan felt really comfortable and confident about this church, partially because my parents have been going to the parent church now for years, and so we've gotten to really know and see kind of what their mission and their goals are and their integrity. And I've actually been in a Bible study at that church. I was in one for like a year when we first moved here. Anyways, my brother goes to the parent church, and he is actually on staff, like doing an internship for children's ministry now. And so that's really cool. He just got some swag the other day and brought Logan a hoodie from the church. That was cool. But yeah, that's what he's up to. It's so crazy. Looking at my brother is honestly the biggest reminder of how fast my kid's childhood is going to go, because it feels like just yesterday practically that Dan and I drove down to LAX to pick up my parents and my brother from the airport when they came home from China with him. And he was a tiny little tot, and Dan hopped out of the Suburban and picked up Casey, holding him by his overalls, and was like, "Hey kid, welcome home." And then we took him to In-N-Out, and that was his first meal in America. And he was 2, so he was younger than Logan was. And now he's an adult with a job and an internship at the church, and it's absolutely crazy. And I really hope that God gives me the awareness to just absolutely soak in all of the moments of my kids' childhood, because it's going to fly, and I just feel so blessed to be able to have had kids. I feel so blessed to be their parents, and Yeah, man. Anyways, back to the Casey question. Casey is such a good guy. Just honestly a good little man, and it's been really beautiful to watch him grow up and see my dad be able to raise a boy, you know, because all of me and it's all girls, all biological girls, and then my brother. And so it's just been beautiful to see, like, wow, I know he's still young, he's got plenty of time to go off the rails. Just kidding, Casey. But you know, and he's his own person. It's not just because of my parents, obviously, but to see the little man that my dad helped, you know, hold hands with and raise is just so beautiful. My brother is beautiful. So yeah. Did I answer that? I think I've answered this before. I don't know. Someone asked if I ever miss living in Cali. And first off, I never call it Cali. That's fine. We can call it Cali, but I just don't ever call it that. But that's how the question was worded. Sometimes I miss some of the friends that I knew for a very large portion of my life. Sometimes I miss the food. That's probably one of the biggest things I've missed since leaving California. And in the dead of winter, I miss the weather. You guys know part of the reason I moved, part of it, many layers, was to experience seasons. And when it is like dead winter, like February, I miss California. That's when I'm like, oh my gosh. But I do love getting to experience the seasons. I love just so much of what I've gotten to experience living outside of California, how I've gotten to see the way that Christians walk out their life. Just, I don't know. I've met a lot more conservative Christians outside of California. I knew a lot of Christians in California. I grew up in the church. Dan and I obviously met in the church and got engaged at 20, but it was different. And a little insight to that, I'm going to be talking about this in one of my interviews with my friend who's the oldest of 11 siblings. Was the culture of Christianity from where I'm sitting was different in California. You know, when Dan and I got engaged, literally our youth pastor's first response was not congratulations, it was why. Literally he looked at us and went, why? And Dan and I were like, because we want to get married. And just looking back, I find that so bizarre, especially in this day and age. Like, he could have even been like, congratulations guys, blah, 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 and then have a talk with us and been like, so what are the reasons that you guys are wanting to do this now? Like, what makes you want to get married now? You know, like, I could see the reasoning, even though I still think it's weird for someone to get to the point of being like, why now? But like, literally the first thing he said, why? And I just find that to be indicative of, I wouldn't have even said that we went to a progressive Christian church, but just a worldly culture, quote unquote, that has kind of infiltrated the church. And I have just met so many very conservative Christians since leaving. You know, my friend that is the oldest of 11 children, like, I've realized, like, oh, lots of people have more than 4 kids outside of California. Like, 4 was the max. 4 was the biggest family I had ever met in California. And now I have met just countless families that have way more than 4 kids, honestly. So yeah, that was kind of a sidetrack of asking if I ever miss California. But yes, sometimes I do miss California. It's not super common, but it happens sometimes. But to be fair, sometimes I also miss Tennessee. Like, I think when somewhere becomes a home, you like transplant a little bit of your heart there. And there are things that I miss sometimes about Tennessee as well, and particularly Nashville. Like, I'm just picturing it now so vividly. It was a beautiful home, and I really enjoyed my time there as well. And prior to leaving California, I never thought we would leave. I thought California would be our home for the rest of our lives. But when it came down to it and we started thinking about having a family, growing a family, that was the first time I ever became confronted with, like, oh snap, I don't think I'm gonna live here anymore. Like, I guess I hadn't thought about having kids, or maybe it was just like the convergence of getting close to having kids and the culture changing, or just, I don't know, feeling that God had something different for us. I don't know. Like I said, no, or maybe I didn't say this, but no offense to anyone living in California. If you are called to be in California, more power to you, praise the Lord. But for us, it was very obvious as things started unfolding. It was like, wow, anyways, I can't picture having children here. And I mean, like, I always flash back to this specific spot in my home in an area I lived in called Bridgeport in California, walking around the front of the kitchen, looking out at the fake lake and listening to this book called Present Over Perfect by Shauna Mequest. I've talked about it before. And as she's describing life with children, just like, I don't know, it was hitting me so hard. I was like, I can't live here anymore, dude. What am I gonna do? And I remember talking to my therapist thinking like she's gonna tell me like, that's grass screener syndrome, like calm down. And she didn't. She was like, you know, life is really different in other states. Like, I don't think this sounds crazy at all. And we proceeded to move. You guys know the rest of the story. But Yeah, wow. I keep circling around and going, but yes, I do sometimes miss California, because yes, I do sometimes miss California. Like I said, particularly the relationships, some of the relationships I had, and then the food. So, but even still, the relationships, I will say this, a lot of those relationships I miss because I knew them for a long period of time. So we had a lot of history together, and some of them were very close friends. But I will also say that a lot of the people I've met now at this point in my life, like particularly now here in Idaho, it's a different kind of friendship, because we have so much in common on some of these things that I am deeply passionate about, that a lot of those friends that I do miss back in California, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of those things that I'm like I said, very passionate about. But up here, I know so many people who are, if not on the same page, at least on the same chapter. And that has been a fun blessing in and of itself in terms of like friendship life and mom life. So yeah, I'm gonna go now. I think every time I film these videos, they end up being like 40 something minutes, and that's me trying to hurry, honestly. So let me know in the comments down below, not only which actor or actress would play you if they made a movie of your life, but also if you have any requests for upcoming videos. Like I said, I'm very excited because I'm pretty sure I'm gonna start the production of my podcast next week. I'm excited, which, speaking of, even though I have my very own list of people that I want to interview, if you have any people that you want to see me interview, feel free to let me know that too down below. I gotta go let Logan in. My mom just brought him back, and I will, God willing, see you guys back here soon with another new video. Bye!